Ladies and gentlemen, dear Irene, now I'm in the position to ask you to sit down. Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, we really would love to you coming more in front of the stage. Some of you are sitting pretty far away, and we are not so many, so that would be really grateful. Thank you. Ladies, and we have some gentlemen I saw, so I say ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session on addressing work life in the changed workplace. Does a hybrid workplace guarantee equality? Today, we are diving into a topic that's reshaping the way we work, the hybrid work model. Studies show that 4 out of 5 employees prefer this flexible approach, and it's clear that it's here to stay. It's especially popular among women and millennials, Gen Z, who value the balance in offers between work and its life responsibilities. The hybrid work model not only provides flexibility, but also, on the other hand, ensures that employees feel included and visible when they are in the office. However, this new ways of working, born, as we all know, in the pandemic, brings its own sets of challenges. It can create an uneven playing field with those working mostly in the office and those working remotely facing completely different experiences. So how do we ensure fairness in this dispersed environment that organizations are still navigating? What metrics should we use for accountability, promotion decisions, and recognizing leadership potential if we don't see our team members anymore? Let's explore these questions together and find ways of make the hybrid work model work for everyone. My name is Annette Matzert. I'm a member of the German host committee of the Global Summit of Women 2025 here in Berlin. And in my normal life, in my professional life, I'm Vice President of HR Policies and Services at Mercedes-Benz. And in my normal private life, I'm a mother of 2 teenage daughters, which is sometimes challenging as well. But anyway, it's a great pleasure to host a session with my wonderful guests, which I would like to briefly introduce to you before I hand over for some insights, which will be the basis for our later discussion. First of all, we have Jana Dobrinskaya. I did well, huh? She's the EY EMEA Managing Partner, Talent and People Consulting leader. She oversees the talent HR function across Europe, the Middle East, India and Africa, providing strategic and day-to-day leadership in recruitment, performance management, reward, learning, development and succession planning. So you have the whole range. She also leads the EMEA People Consulting practice and the Diversity, Equity and Inclusiveness Agenda for EI. Then we have Dr. Jutta Allmendinger on our left. She's a professor of sociology at Humboldt University of Berlin. So it's a home run for you. And we'll see, yeah? And has been an honorary professor of sociology at the Free University of Berlin since 2012. She was the president of the Berlin Social Science Center from 2007 to 2024. Jutta has served on numerous advisory boards, including chairing the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council under the German presidency in 2024. I'm deeply impressed. Then we have with us, right to my left, we have Iris Bonet. She's the Albert Pratt Professor of Business and Government at the co-director and the co-director of the Women and Public Policy Program at Harvard Kennedy School. She's a behavioral economist, and I love that combination of words. I really love it. Who combines, because we are losing behavior in the economy at the moment, a little bit. Who combines insights from economics and psychology to improve decision-making in organizations and society. She is the author of the award-winning book, What Works? Gender Equality by Design, and co-author of Make Work Fair. And last but not least, we have Heike Prinz with us. She's the Chief Talent Officer and Labor Director at Bayer AG. She has been a member of the Board of Management of Bayer AG since September 2023. Heike has held various leadership roles within Bayer, including leading commercial operations in Latin America and EMEA, and serving as President and Representative Director of Bayer, and I hope I pronounced that correct, Yakuhin, correct? Limited in Japan. Thanks to all of you for being here. And now I would like to hand over to Jana for the first presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And first, I would like to thank you, dear audience, for staying on. I know it was super tempting to do something else, but clearly you're very much interested in listening about the hybrid world and what benefits and what challenges and what opportunities it brings to the business and to the society and to our people. Over the past 6 years, we, as the whole world, have moved from almost no remote working to almost complete remote working during COVID, obviously, to now what we call a new normal, which is the hybrid work. Throughout all these years, we in EY have been gathering data and serving many organizations and their employees, and also some job seekers, to understand their reactions, to understand their expectations, and to understand how they feel about operating in the new hybrid world working environment. And there's some interesting trends coming out, and we recently have completed this survey among almost 2,000 multinational organizations operating in North America, Asia Pacific, and in EMEA. So we have quite a diverse sample. And there's some interesting trends and common themes coming out of that, which I would love to share with you today. And the main trends, and again, regardless of the geographical or cultural differences, is that there are different expectations, or there's a gap in expectations of the employees and the employers in terms of the hybrid work arrangements. There's a generational gap. So the younger generations, they see flexibility as non-negotiable. So they really see that the employers have to provide this hybrid work arrangements and opportunities there. And also that although there are some clear benefits both to the employers and the employees, hybrid work brings certain challenges. And I'll talk about that in a second. A couple of data points. So by the end of last year, 90% of the organizations we've surveyed have either implemented or started implementing what they call the return to work policies. And even the title of that had a negative connotation, return to work, so almost mandating people to come back to the office. And obviously, as human behavior tells us, which I'm sure our esteemed professors will tell us, that kind of faced resistance from the employees. The main driver for that was, for the return to office policies, was the expectation of the employers for higher productivity. Because there was a perception, and still is, that working in the office leads to higher productivity. However, many employers reported that they faced challenges with their real estate because during COVID, a lot of organizations, they decided to save on the office space. So what happened when they forced people back into the office, a lot of people decided to come into the office in the middle of the week, and guess what? There was not enough space. So that created the first challenge. So many employers reported that they will allow fully remote work to only some employees. But there's a 14% gap in terms of how many employers said that they would allow that versus how many employees actually willing to be working remotely. So that's another another data that proves the expectation gap that we've uncovered. On average, both employees and employers agreed that 2 or 3 days in the office would be would be a normal practice that they will allow and that they will accept. But the employees tend to, like I said, to come to the office in the middle of the week, so normally Tuesday to Thursday. And again, these are the days of the week that they've reported in the survey. And what it turned into is that most of the employers had to get rid of the assignment of seats. So 70% of the knowledge workers, where it's not a production cycle, where it's not connected to the machinery, where people are basically need a desk and a computer, they eliminated the work assignments. And at the same time, the employees said that the main reason why we want to be in the office is because we want to collaborate, because we want social interactions. So there is another gap that has been created due to this hybrid working. Another point that was flagged by the employees is that they have personal circumstances that they want the employer to factor in. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not, I want a policy that factors in that my commute to the office takes an hour and a half in the rush hour, and I would rather start later and continue the day and leave later, but it will give me the necessary flexibility so I don't get stuck in traffic with everyone else who are trying to get to their offices at the same time. There are a few differences by age, by gender, and also by the role, the job role itself. Gen Zs, like I mentioned, they show the highest interest to hybrid work, and the job seekers, especially in their 20s, they don't understand why they have to be in the office every day. I have a 25-year-old son, and he went into the workforce. His first job was during COVID. So he's changed 3 jobs since then, and he couldn't understand why an organization would request him to come to work. And it's just not my son. He's not the only statistics that I'm referring to. It's the generation, the younger generations, they see it more or less as a prerequisite of their future employment. From the job perspective, managers and leaders, so people in higher positions, they prefer hybrid over remote work. But what's interesting, the younger generations, they reported that they want to see their managers always in the office. So whenever I'm in the office, I want my boss to be there, because this is how I learn, this is how I see, this is how I get the information, this is how I see what's happening in the company. So there is also a disconnect there. So I will come to the office only twice a week, but whenever I'm there, I want my boss there. And finally, from a gender perspective, more females tend to prefer more flexibility and even fully remote work. I mean, you see the difference in the numbers. And it's understandable, and the main driver for that is that women, as the caregivers, they do have more obligations at home. I know it's biased and maybe a stereotype, but this is what people reported through the survey. So preference is different. Now, I spoke about preferences, but we also studied the actual, we call it talent health, but essentially it's a satisfaction, it's an employee satisfaction with their employer and whether they would promote an organization that they work at. So in terms of the job satisfaction or talent health, the data showed us that people who do not work remotely at all have the lowest score. So if they're always in the office, they're less satisfied. And on the contrary, those who come in 1 day per week have the highest. So 1 day per week have the highest job satisfaction, and those who do not come to the office at all have mixed. There's a 6-point gender gap, unfortunately, and it's pretty sticky, I would say, because year on year we've been observing a gender gap in terms of the job satisfaction. Probably not much related to the hybrid world, but this survey, the last survey, was specifically asking questions about the hybrid work arrangements, but there is a gender gap there. And I already mentioned the generational differences, but what's interesting that Gen Zs, they scored the highest in terms of the satisfaction when they do completely remote work. So when they're never in the office, they're the happiest. Unlike the boomers, the baby boomers, the more senior people, they are the happiest when they come into the office 2 days a week. So you already see that. I don't know if you associate with any of these generations yourself, but if you think about it, this is not your preference. This is why you're satisfied with your job if you're in the office twice a week versus completely remote if you're a Gen Z and a young, like my son. Now, in summary, I would say, and I would let my fellow panelists to share their experience, but the main challenges that we picked up through the data and the insights that we received both from the organizations but also from the employees would probably fall into the 4 categories. The first one is visibility and the proximity bias. And this comes especially to the play when organizations think about allocation of work. It's so much easier to give a task to a person who's physically in the office sitting next to me rather than thinking about, oh, who is on the line, who should I connect with, although that person might be better skilled for the task. It's just the proximity bias. So work allocation, promotions, when it comes to making decisions about whom to promote, proximity bias gets in the way. And there comes also a recognition in terms of the contribution of the people. If I don't see you in the office, I would probably think less of your contribution rather than if you are in my face every day. I'm exaggerating slightly, but to make the points that this is what people reported as the challenges that they're facing. The next one, the gender one, I already mentioned that females have more caregiving duties. And again, this comes with a perception of productivity, higher productivity if people are in the office. So there's a perceived bias, again, if people are less in the office, they're less productive. The cultural challenges, and it comes to the communication challenges, different cultures, and if they're underrepresented cultures in a particular work environment, they tend to be quieter in the virtual meetings, or I'm sure you've all been in the hybrid meetings where the majority sit in the room and there are a few people joining virtually on screens. Guess who gets more attention? Obviously people who sit in the room, who are present in the audience, and not joining virtually. And then the final one, the final challenge, again, I already covered. This is generational differences. Although the younger ones, like I mentioned, they prefer to work remote and or come to the office not for many days during the week. The main challenges, though, are very simplistic. Some of them relate to commute. Some of them relate to the cost of the commute and also cost of working in the office. Because if the offices are located in pretty expensive areas and pretty expensive neighborhoods, for the younger ones with a lower compensation, it becomes pretty expensive. I show up in the office, my boss is not there, I don't get the development, I get to sit in front of my computer with my headphones. What's the point of coming to the office? And finally, there's no space to work. So these were the main challenges mentioned by the younger people. Again, in terms of some of the responses, especially the corporate organizations, the corporates' responses to these challenges, we are now seeing more and more creative policies that are becoming more and more personalized. So the message that people want their personal circumstances and personal preferences to be addressed by the corporate policies has been heard. Visibility is addressed through the skill-based work allocation, so reminding people that you need to think about not the individual who's sitting next to you in the office, but rather who's best placed in terms of the skill set that this person has. Outcome-based performance management, and I'm really curious how my panel members would talk about that. And finally, and I think it was mentioned in the opening plenary, culture of leadership. So many organizations have now started thinking about how to develop leaders who know how to lead in the hybrid world and how to manage hybrid teams and take responsibility for that, fostering that inclusive culture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jana. It's a wide field, and it's that topic where studies never meet perception and emotions. It's there are so many different perceptions, and you can come up with facts over facts, and each one is taking the fact that is interested in, and so we will discuss that later. But just a short anecdote. One Gen Z employee of ours told me, "You only want to come us back to the office because you baby boomers and the generation below, you're just lonely." And that's the true reason. Okay, but anyway, we are proceeding with Jutta. The stage is yours.
Oh, I'm even taller now than I usually am. This is amazing. I think I get rid of that. Now I feel much better. Hello again, and be welcome in Berlin. I'm living in this wonderful city since 17 years, and she said, well, stay and listen. I can only advise you to also look around at the city, see something, and it's really a beautiful setting. I lived before in Munich. I had some trouble getting used to Berlin, I have to say, but now I love to live here, and it would be wonderful if you get some sort of grip on where you are now.
Sorry, Jutta. I think we have the wrong presentation. What are you?
I do not have any presentation,
Okay.
so you can't have a wrong presentation because I don't have a
Okay,
presentation.
then we only see something wrong here. Okay.
Yes, but I usually don't talk with presentations. So most of what I wanted to say has already been said. This is always wonderful to be the second person in line to talk. I really want to point at a couple of really important societal risks. You know, I'm a social scientist. I'm of course interested in individual performance. I'm also interested in satisfaction and things like this. But what I try to do is to look on what really has happened in major areas of our life. So I will focus on societal implications of the Home Office, on urban transformation, on labor market restructuring, on gender dynamics, on social cohesion, on environmental outcomes, and access to digital infrastructure. And I try to do all of that in the 8 remaining minutes I have. Let me start with urban and regional transformations. The shift of remote work reduces reliance on central business districts. A decrease in daily commuting has resulted in lower demand for commercial office space and less foot traffic in urban cores, at worst impacting small businesses, public transit systems, and municipal revenues. I can give you some numbers. According to a study by the OECD in 2021, cities like San Francisco and London saw weekday foot traffic decline by over 60% in core districts. 60% decline. Meanwhile, smaller towns and rural areas have experienced population inflows driven by workers seeking affordable housing and better living conditions. Also, rural and suburban areas may benefit from remote migration. Housing prices have risen tremendously in many of such regions, leading to social replacement, displacement, and gentrification. Without policy intervention, this shift will deepen urban-rural inequality tremendously. And we hardly talk about this, in particular in Germany. My second point is on labor market restructuring. Remote work offers flexibility, which indeed can expand access to employment for underrepresented groups, such as persons with disabilities, caregivers, and rural population. It also enables, and this we know from all the numbers which we have, older workers to extend participation in the labor force. However, the availability of remote jobs is very, very uneven. A report by the International Labour Organization highlights that only 25% of jobs in low-income countries are potentially teleworkable, compared to over 60% in high-income economies. The rise of location-independent labor raises concerns about geographic wage scaling and job outsourcing. Companies may choose to adjust salaries based on employees' local costs of living, and we can already see this in the moment, which can erode income inequality and contribute to the erosion of regional wage standards. My third point is on gender and family dynamics. Remote work indeed could reconfigure gender relations at home and in the labor market. In households where both partners work remotely, caregiving responsibilities could indeed be more equally distributed. However, this is not what we see. Persistent gender norms often result in women taking on an even larger share of unpaid domestic labor, even when working full-time from home. And we first observed this in 2020 when the COVID pandemic broke out. And it did not stop so far. UN Women in 2022 found that during the pandemic, women globally spend an average of 4.5 hours per day on unpaid care work, compared to 1.5 hours for men. And here again, without targeted family policies and supportive workplace cultures, remote work may reinforcing rather than alleviate gender inequality. And by now, we still see that it increases work imbalance. The fourth point is on social cohesion and mental health. Remote work reduces informal social interaction, which can weaken workplace friendship and diminish collective belonging. While some employees benefit from quiet workspaces, others, especially, and this has been said before, younger or single individuals report increasingly feelings of loneliness and disconnection. A 2022 study by Microsoft Work Trend Index reported that over 50% of remote workers felt more isolated, while younger workers expressed concerns about reduced mentorship and networking opportunities. Long-term implications may include also weaker organizational loyalty and diminished civil engagement, and there are many fresh studies out who give the numbers to that. My fifth point is on environmental sustainability. We talked about this a little bit before. Remote work contributes to environmental goals by reducing daily commuting and office energy consumption. The International Energy Agency estimates that a typical round trip car commute avoided about 40 grams of CO2 emissions daily per worker. However, these gains may partially offset by increased residential energy use, home heating and cooling, and higher reliance on digital infrastructure. The environmental benefits of remote work, while real, must be weighed against new forms of consumption. The sixth point, digital infrastructure and social equity. The effectiveness and inclusiveness of remote work depends heavily on reliable access on digital tools and high-speed internet. The digital divide remains a major barrier in both developed and developing countries. In the EU, 89% of urban households have access to high-speed internet compared to only 52% in rural areas. Without substantial public investment in broadband and digital literacy, remote work risks excluding large segments of the population, exacerbating educational and employment inequality. 7. Education, childcare, and civic life. Remote work is reshaping family routines and placing new demands on education and childcare systems. Increased flexibility may support alternative school schedules or hybrid educational models, but it also blurs the boundaries between work and caregiving, increasing stress on parents. And if I say parents, this is not entirely true. It in particular increases the stress of mothers. And I work a lot with the Charité here, and they see that it increases, it increases, it increases. Furthermore, increased reliance on digital communication for public participation may diminish local civic engagement, particularly among digitally excluded populations. In conclusion, the normalization of home office presents a dual-edged shift in contemporary society. While it offers the potentials for more flexible, inclusive, and environmentally sustainable work, it also introduces new risks of social isolation. It increases inequality and regional imbalance. Policymakers and employers must adopt a comprehensive and equity-centered approach to ensure that the benefits of remote work are broadly and fairly distributed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jutta, for your insights. It's really always worth it to lift your view a little bit and look at the consequences and what comes after you decide to change the work environment. And that's, for example, how we started at Mercedes hybrid working in 2016. The Germans know that the Stuttgart traffic is a nightmare. So we asked our employees if they would like to work one day or the other from home just because of the traffic. And the response was so clear that we couldn't get out of that issue anymore. So we had the first agreement with the Works Council. And the new thing in that agreement was that not the employee had to argue or had to discuss the reason why it is necessary to work from home, but the supervisor had to argue why it would be necessary at that day to come into the office. And of course that was, slightly increasing, and then COVID came, that changed everything. But that was our start for hybrid working. Yeah. Okay, now we come into Iris.
Thank you so much. And most of all, thank you all for being here. We know that the temptations of Berlin are looming large. So with that, I want to take a somewhat bigger perspective for a moment and talk about flexibility broadly, while then also focusing in on time flexibility and locational flexibility. And what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes is, in fact, give you a bit of a summary of the chapter of the book that was mentioned before, Make Work Fair, where we talk about work arrangements specifically. Now, before I go there, just a quick precursor here. as soon as I can change my slides. Yeah, perfect. In that fairness is an interesting word, and we chose it very purposely. And some press, of course, thinks that we chose the word specifically for this moment in time. As you can tell, I'm Swiss originally, but I come from the US. That's not why we wrote the book. We wrote the book because we thought that, in fact, DEI would benefit from a rethink. And that's what the book is trying to do. Now, let me talk a bit more about specifically 3 aspects of flexible work. The first one is parental leave. And the person on the screen here is Josh Levs, and some of you might have read his book, All In. He became noteworthy because he sued CNN, his employer at the time, because he wasn't given paternity leave. Eventually, CNN found a compromise with Josh, and he was actually given parental leave. But I'm starting with his example because one of the issues that we have is that in this broad space of flexibility, we have gender differences in uptake. You have gender differences in uptake of parental leave. You have gender differences in interest in flexible work. You have gender differences in interest in working remotely. And whenever we have these type of gender differences, I'm an economist by training, the market will respond and will discriminate against the people they find less attractive. So one first important takeaway is parental leave has to be available to everyone, independent of your gender or your sex. Now, Santander, the multinational bank headquartered in Spain, also shared that view. A few years ago, they introduced parental leave, but men were not taking it. So they ran a little experiment. So they first asked the men, would you take parental leave if ever you became a father? What do you think about parental leave? And more than 90% of the male employees at Santander said, yes, of course. Great thing, and I will take it. And then they were asked, what do you think about other men in our company? And they're like, oh, no. Other men, no, they will not take parental leave. They don't think that's a great thing. That's a women's thing. And then the simple intervention, the simple experiment then is to tell everyone that, in fact, almost every man thinks parental leave is a good thing. So the norm, in fact, is not what you think, that nobody believes in it, but the norm is that most people actually do believe in it, most men in this instance, and it turns out that led to more men taking parental leave. So it's important for us to think about this question of uptake because you have a resume here in front of you, and if you compare Robert's first job as project assistant with his second job as junior project manager, you will see that there is something that I'm going to call a career gap in quotation marks. 4 years, right? So he had a bit of a gap between his first job and his second job. Colleagues of mine ran a large experiment in the United Kingdom with 9,000 employers trying to understand how big is the penalty of having career gaps. How much less likely are you to be invited to an interview if on your resume you show a career gap of half a year, 3 years of more? It turns out that gap is huge, even though in research, we actually don't know how much less productive you will be if you have taken a career gap. Maybe you'll be more productive because you have learned new things. Maybe you will return refreshed. You know, probably if I had been out of the workforce for 20 years, that probably would have affected my, my understanding of economics. But maybe 1 year, 2 years, very, very hard to know. So, my summary here is really important for us to think about leave, who takes leave, and make leave available to everyone and make sure everyone takes it up. Okay, second point I want to make is about time flexibility. And I want to dispel a bit of a myth. And the myth is that blue-collar workers never benefit from time flexibility. It is absolutely true that white-collar workers tend to benefit more from flexible work arrangements. However, there are very interesting examples of establishments that have introduced time flexibility to the great benefits of their workers. And I have an example here. Chick-fil-A is a fast food chain in the United States. And they have now introduced time flexibility where workers can choose how many hours per day they want to work. Let's assume they have a 35-hour week. Maybe they want to work all of those 35 hours in 4 days, or maybe even in 3 days. Some workers chose that. It turns out it increases their happiness enormously, increases their likelihood of staying in the firm dramatically, and in fact is something that we should think much harder about. Because time inflexibility for what I'm going to call shift workers, who have very little control over their time, is a huge topic that we need to do more about to equalize the playing field. So let's move beyond white-collar work and also think about other types of work where often the employees can benefit even more from control over their lives and over the work hours. Okay. Third comment now that I'm going to talk a little more about is location flexibility, and that's probably what you're thinking about when you think about hybrid work, about remote work, etc. So first of all, on your left, you have Trip.com, and I know some of you are from Asia, so you'll be very familiar with this company. It is the biggest travel company in China, and colleagues started to run experiments with Trip already in 2006. Kind of trying to explore different versions of remote work, kind of finding what Jutta kind of just alluded to, and actually even before we talked about, not everyone feels the same about remote work. Some people love it, some people hate it. There are gender differences, there are differences between managers and employees, there are differences between junior and senior people, so one size likely doesn't fit all. But in fact, flexibility has been tried out by a number of organizations, including you have the US government here, the United States Patent and Trade Office, and then, of course, a number of tech companies like Dropbox that all of us are using a lot that are fully remote. Now, what do we know about this? First of all, it's quite interesting how many countries now are open to digital nomads. I think that's something not many people know about. 40 countries, including Germany, have specific visas for people who want to work as a digital nomad, live in Germany, pay their taxes in Germany, but work for a company that is someplace else in the world. Now, that's an interesting trend kind of globally, but I find it even more interesting when we look at one country. And I'm going to go back to the US for a moment. 90% of the growth in tech jobs in the United States happened in just a couple of cities, including the one that Jutta just mentioned, San Francisco. San Francisco, of course, Boston is a hub, San Jose, Seattle. I mean, none of this will be a surprise to you. But that, of course, creates enormous inequity in the country. Now, we have Tulsa here because Tulsa has become a really interesting example of a city that is trying to attract remote workers, that is trying to attract people who used to work in Seattle or used to work in San Francisco or in Boston, kind of moving to Tulsa and trying to do this in a smart, inclusive way where the Tulsans benefit from the digital nomads in some case, but in some case actually real residents who move to Tulsa. Some people, and I know it's controversial as Jutta just explained, but some people argue that could be the biggest equalizer in terms of geographic inequality. That all of a sudden you don't have to work, you don't have to live in the high rent, you know, kind of community that is San Francisco or Boston, but you could actually work in Tulsa. But again, a lot has to happen that we don't have time to talk about now, but a lot has to happen in Tulsa to make this work for the Tulsans so that we don't have the issues of gentrification and other issues that can happen. Okay. Clearly, I just wanted to put this out there, clearly the world would benefit dramatically if we were able to include more people into the workforce, and I know you all know this, including the Tulsans, including the women, including people of color who too long have been discriminated against in the United States and other parts of the world. And this is just one statistic that I like that shows that GDP per capita in the United States today is about 40% larger because the restrictions of the 60s are no longer in place. which is why I'm kind of a big fan, as you can already tell, of increased flexibility. Now, different countries have made different choices in terms of working from home. You can try to find your country. The average is about 1.2 days across the world. So these are the days that people work remotely. There's huge differences. South Korea, very low. Germany, kind of pretty average. United States, a little higher. Generally, the Anglo-Saxon countries are slightly higher. Who has benefited? Now, often in the census data, we don't have all the information we'd like to have, but I wanted to bring this slide to us here to remind us that the group that has benefited most are people with disabilities. They're often forgotten, and now then I tell you, of course, we're all like, yeah, obviously, that makes a lot of sense. So let's not forget people with disabilities. It's actually not. The differences by gender weren't huge. They were actually non-existent, as you could say. As you could see here, age, etc., didn't make such a big difference. Now, I want to end by going to India, by giving you a very concrete example of why working from home can actually make a huge difference. So what you have here on this slide are women's work participation rates by states in India. So on your left, you have Bihar, where the likelihood, where women's participation in the workforce, in the paid workforce, right? This, of course, doesn't take into account informal work, is 9%, so very low. And then on your right, you have the Himalayas, the northern states, where workforce participation of women is almost at the level of Germany, for example. So this particular study took place in Western Bengal, that's marked there in yellow, where the work participation rate was 23%. And what the researchers did was something quite simple. They just looked at how many men and women end up working in a job dependent on whether it can be done at home as compared to in the office. And why is this so important? Because I know those of you in India, of course, will know this. Depending on the states where you live, the norms against women's work outside of the home are very strong. So this can actually make a big difference. So now what you have here is in yellow that 56% workforce participation rates of women who can work from home as compared to the 27% when women have to work at home. And I'm bringing this to you to suggest that sometimes, we have to think very hard about the constraints that keep people back in the geographies and the cultures that they live, and adjust our work arrangements accordingly. Okay, to summarize. So demand for flexible work is high. My number is very similar to the previous speakers. About a third of respondents say that they like it, including some recent research by economists looking at whether people actually have a willingness to pay for flexible work, right? That's what we like to see in economics, kind of saying, well, would people be willing to give up salary if they could work flexibly? How important is that really for them? And that willingness to pay is about 7%. So supply of flexible work is still continuing, even though there's a lot of noise about big companies, having everyone return to the office. We still have about 1.5 days per week working from anywhere, really. The benefits, my previous speakers have summarized them already. Job satisfaction, return to turnover, but they're not the same for everyone. And the one aspect that hasn't been pointed out that I wanted to point out to you all is actually quite interesting. In our book, we discuss a study at length that has found that it is senior women who benefit most from working from home, and it is junior women who are hurt most from working from home. How does that work? So I think on junior women, we understand. It's like the lack of networks. You can't socialize. You're not there. You have the proximity problem that we heard about before. But how about senior women? Senior women are the ones to provide the mentoring, to do all those, what I'm going to call non-promotable activities that don't help their career advancement, but they are public goods, good things for the organization. So clearly, these differences across backgrounds matter. We've heard about some of the costs, including promotion gaps, etc., things that I'm sure we'll discuss in just a moment. And on that note, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Iris, for your insights. And we just learned flexibility creates chances for many people. And we did this on a regular basis. We are asking our employees about certain topics and in general. And we made a survey and asked them about hybrid working. And the come out was that the job satisfaction and the perceived mental health, you have the high score when that was what the company offers meets the expectation, even though there are many individual expectations. The one wants to be more in the office and the other more working from home. But the more you meet the expectation, the higher was in that survey the job satisfaction and the perceived mental health and the perceived way of managing job and private life. So it's there are still many things to do. But before I carry on with our panel discussion, I would ask Heike for our last presentation. Stage is yours.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. Waiting for the slide to come up. Well, while we do that, thank you. I work for Bayer, and before I talk to you about the transformation that we are going through as a company towards a more fluid, flexible, and agile organization, maybe 2 or 3 words about our company, just in case you don't know who the heck is Bayer. We are a life science company. We have products in the field of health, but we also have products to ensure food security for an ever-increasing world population. And most of you may know our most famous product, and probably some of you have also already used it, which is aspirin. So again, we are active as a life science company. We are headquartered in Germany, but we have operations in 80 countries around the globe. We employ about 90,000 people from 145 or so nations, so quite diverse workforce. And as I said, we are undergoing a profound transformation as we speak. And I would say up until 2 years ago, we were probably looking like a lot of classical big multinational companies, organized in a hierarchical way, with quite a few silos, people not knowing left and right what their colleagues were doing. But now this has all changed. We're still in the middle of it, but we are 2 years into that journey. And what I want to show you here is our new operating model, very high level. We call it dynamic shared ownership. Dynamic because, as I said, we want to become more flexible and fluid. Shared ownership, also because we feel the ownership of the company is not just with the investors or with top management, but every single employee should be having a shared ownership in their company and also behave as a mini entrepreneur or businesswoman or businessman within their company. So there's 5 key principles that this is based upon. The one is, I would call, radical mission focus. So we want our people, we want to concentrate our resources on everything that is related to our mission. And I believe, but I'm of course biased, we have a wonderful mission, which is health for all, hunger for none. A very bold, very ambitious mission, but I think we are making credible progress towards achieving it. So we want to concentrate and focus everything on anything that creates value towards that mission. In return, it also means stopping everything that doesn't do that. We also have shifted towards giving empowerment to employees and to teams. So this is, picture this as an organization that is made up of 10,000, 11,000 by now, and still counting teams, micro teams, or we call them also micro enterprises. Each one of those teams act as a micro enterprise. And what's really important, these teams are not static in their composition, but composition can change over time. So there's also some fluidity, which I will talk about in a minute. Third principle is radical value creation and customer focus. So it's all about creating impact, creating value, and centering our activities around the customer. And also something that we see more and more organizations adopting, and we do so too, these teams that I just spoke about, they work in 90-day cycles. So every 90 days, the team does a retro, they sit down, they define the priorities for the next 90 days, and. So very high-paced kind of environment. But I think what is very important for this whole model to work is that we create really an inclusive work environment. And as you may appreciate, if you have innovation at the center of your business model, it's indispensable that you have a diverse composition also of those teams for them to thrive and to produce the results that we want them to have. So really creating an environment where every employee can show up as their authentic selves is very important to us. All of this is also underpinned by a slightly evolved or even new leadership philosophy. And we all know examples of leadership, especially in hierarchical organization, where people, like I'm here, you're leading from the front, and you basically tell people, well, follow me. There's a lot of, I would say, also fights in leadership. We are looking more towards a leadership style that leads from behind, where leaders support and enable the team, but they are not sort of micromanaging the teams. Because as I said, most of the decisions and the work should be done by the teams themselves. Now, I talked about us wanting to get more fluid and agile and nimble. And that's where talent flow, we call it. So having people flow from one team working on one project to another one, we want to encourage much more of this. If we look at career paths that our employees have today, they're pretty much, within certain parts of the organization, but there's not as much crisscross flowing from one part of the organization to the other. And of course, in order to get more of this flow and fluidity, you need transparency. So how do you achieve this? We chose to set up a global talent marketplace, which is now globally gone live at the beginning of the year. And picture this as, a platform just like LinkedIn, where you can upload your profile with all your skills. And at the same time, also those teams that I spoke about, they can upload their projects. And this platform is, if you like, a matchmaking platform where you match the skills that the teams require to do some work with employees that possess those skills. And you heard me say the word skill a lot, because all of this is based on skills. In the past, we've seen a lot of instances where somebody said, oh, I would like to have Mary on my team. Today, we want to have more discussions about, oh, I need this and this and this skill. And then we take a look, and maybe Mary has all these skills, and Mary also has a passion to work on that topic. But it could also be Maggie, or it could be Tom who possess this. I think what this also does is it gives much more autonomy or authority, I should rather say, to employees to drive their own careers. Because one thing I've been hearing when I talk a lot to our top talents is they say, well, in the past, it's often been my manager has been the gatekeeper of my career. And that can be a tremendously positive thing if this is a manager who really cares about developing people. He or she opens up and leverages their networks to support young and rising talent. But it can also be someone who sort of, is the gatekeeper and does not transparently share all the opportunities that are there. This is different with this model, where you have full transparency and you can flow to where your interest is, and you can also determine which of your skills do you want to hone, new skills you want to acquire, and. I think what it also does, it offers additional opportunities. We've heard a lot about location flexibility and. We do see a lot of those teams that post projects that say, well, we don't care so much where you are located. In fact, our team has members from maybe 3-4 different countries or locations. We care more about the skills and the expertise that you bring that is so tremendously important for the work that we want to accomplish as a team. So I think it also does open up much more possibilities for cross-border working, but in a virtual setting. So again, I think one step towards also opening up more opportunities, many of which I think women can benefit a lot from. But I'd also like to say I think there's also a lot of men who like the idea of being able to work on a project without necessarily having to relocate and change maybe countries even. I already spoke about the importance of having a diverse composition of teams and also providing an inclusive workplace environment. And here you see the 4 pillars on which this rests in our company. And I'd like to highlight actually our business resource groups in particular, because they play a key role and they are also key enablers and drivers of this in the company. And in particular, relevant for women is the GROW business resource group, who are advocating for the advancement of women. And on the next slide, I just want to highlight a few of the things that we offer. And again, this is a non-exhaustive list. I think we've heard from our panelists already quite a few of those aspects. We collaborate quite a bit also with partners and the HBA Ambassador Program. So here we collaborate with the Healthcare Business Women's Association. This is a leadership development program for women. And I think it's been a huge success, talking to some of those amazing ladies who have participated. I think they feel this is a super good opportunity for them to develop. But I'd also like to highlight our Leadership Link program, where a lot of our male and female senior leaders offer their time for coaching. They offer their time for career discussions with our younger, more junior talents. But also they offer connections and the networking, because I think networking, being seen, being exposed, this is where I think we as senior leaders have an important role to play to help the more younger and up-and-coming talents in our organization benefit from our networks, just like we benefited from the networks of senior leaders when we were young or early in our careers. I think there's also a lot that we do around focused talent acquisition and development. And I think we've heard it from some of the panelists. Eliminating bias, I think, is super important. Bias is always going to be there, but how do you make sure you mitigate it as much as you can? So we do a lot of unconscious bias trainings, but also when you think of promotion decisions or decisions about filling positions, we look a lot at diverse candidate slates. I think this is a must. You cannot come up and say, I have a non-diverse slate. There's only this homogeneous group of talents that can possibly take up this role. But then I think it's also important to have really diverse interview panels. And we do rely a lot on interview panels and not just interviews by 1 or 2 individuals. And bringing those different perspectives together, I think, again, it helps eliminate bias. We heard a lot, and I'll be really brief because this has been touched on a lot about future of work. Of course, as a company, we do offer, I already mentioned with the talent marketplace, virtual cross-border assignments. We offer work flexibility. Of course, we do not have a return to office policy, by the way. Maybe we are one of the few exceptions. At least I was interested in, looking at your statistics. But we have very many and flexible work arrangements. And when the pandemic hit, we also very early on said, let's not try to come up with a global kind of arrangement, how to make it work, but let every country really decide what fits best for them. Now, I will say, if you move to an organization where a lot of the stuff really happens in those teams, I think finding the right balance between presence but also allowing flexibility of remote work arrangements, that is going to be the interesting piece. And this is, in all honesty, also where some of the teams still struggle a bit, because I think good teamwork also comes with intimacy, I'm tempted to say, and knowing each other well. And you can get to a certain level via a screen, but I heard some of the teams say, well, at least maybe at the beginning, because these are newly formed teams and they also change composition over time. At least we want to come together once every X weeks, months or so, in order to make sure we also engage not just on a formal, but also on an informal level. I already spoke about leadership, so maybe I can skip that. And with that, I want to make sure I leave enough time for, I'm sure, a lot of questions all of you have to either of the panelists. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Heike, for your interesting presentation. Your approach with the marketplace seems to be pretty radical. I have no idea how you did negotiate that with the Works Council, but anyway, obviously you managed, so congratulations from my side. And wow to all of you, because that's such a high-level panel. We heard about statistics and numbers. We heard about the impact from remote working. We heard about all flexibility instruments and the way they went, and now we had some insights from your company. Thank you so much so far. I'm sure there are lots of questions, so I would open up the panel for the audience until you found your way to the mic. I have one question, because, you were talking, all of you were talking about how it is, how the impact is, about general things. So now a more personal question to all of you. How has the hybrid work model transformed your respective fields where you're working? And what key opportunities and challenges have you encountered adapting to this new way of working, just in your certain area? We're talking about university and everything else. Who wants to start?
Well, I'm a person who more or less always works at work, actually, because, I have been a leader of a 500 people organization, and as she said, they want to meet me, and I also realize that I can do this mentoring much, much better if I know those people in person. I can't mentor because I do not know those people equally well if I only have Zoom meetings. And more mentorship programs now move on digital encounters. But this doesn't work. I cannot recommend people because I can't get in touch with them. I don't know how they tick, or however you would like to say this. So I used to be at the office, hang around, talk to people, and then close my door and walk in private for a couple of hours. But this is probably the old school, but it also means that I get in touch to many, many different people while walking to work, while getting back to work. And this is something I think which we forget, that our individual preferences have a huge societal impact, because they may decrease trust in each other if we do not meet regularly very, very different people.
And obviously you are meeting expectations, because we learned that the younger generation is expecting to have the boss in the office when they arrive.
So Harvard has a policy of 3 days in the office and 2 days wherever you'd like to work, in the office or elsewhere. And as a manager, my biggest adjustment has been to learn how to manage. And I also think that's a more generalizable point, that when we all were forced to work from home during COVID, managers really weren't prepared. So most surveys report that employees prefer working from home and managers don't like it. And, there are good reasons and bad reasons, but one of the reasons certainly is that we haven't learned how to manage people who aren't in the office. And that actually was an adjustment for me too. So for example, I used to have my executive assistant sit in front of my office, and that was lovely. I could spontaneously, come out of my office and say, oh, couldn't you check this? Couldn't you call Y? Couldn't you this or that? So I have become much more organized, respecting her life and her rhythm, and her way of doing things that I really hadn't thought about before. I also manage a bigger team of staff and fellows, and the same for them. that I think I, as a manager, have grown because I have to think more about how I manage.
You're telling that so calm, so you didn't have any emotions while learning how to manage to take all the private responsibilities of your employees into your account?
Could you repeat the question, please?
So you were just telling that you did grow as a manager because you had to deal with all the different interests or
also work schedules.
Boundaries. Yeah, and you were so relaxed, and I guess you never had emotions during that way of growing as a manager?
Oh, I never had trouble, you're saying. No, I did, of course. It wasn't always easy for me to do that. And still today, I'm like, oh my God, she's not in the office. I really do need those copies before I go into the classroom. Of course, there are these moments where I wish somebody was available 24/7 for me. But that's not life, and that's not fairness. So I had to grow also a little bit just because I had to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll probably say two things. At EY, as a professional services organization, we follow the client's expectations. So if clients want us to be at their premises, we will always be there. In terms of personal preferences and how it shaped me, I would say I prefer to have a purpose to come into the office and purpose to be with the team. And it's either to create, to celebrate, to mentor, to brainstorm. So there has to be a purpose. And it worked really well with my own team because they know I'm there. I'm quite approachable as a leader, but they would also know that I will not demand for them to be in the office just because I'm there. There has to be a purpose.
Yeah, I would second that. I'm on average in the office 4 days a week if I'm not traveling. One day I work from my home office. What I realized is I personally get a lot of energy out of interacting with people. So that really, if we have a face-to-face meeting also with a larger group, that really energizes me. I also realize that sometimes if you have a group of people together, you get a lot of stuff done, simply because you can just spontaneously talk about things by the water cooler over a cup of coffee and. So there's also some efficiency aspect. At the same time, I also do enjoy some flexibility in having work arrangements. And I think the right approach needs to be to also give more autonomy to the teams to self-organize. And this is why, we have also refrained from these one-size-fits-all policies, because also the type of work that gets done in a company, it's very different if you think of research and development versus marketing and sales and anything in between. So why, have senior management regulate this from the top? Why not give more autonomy to the teams? And I think if you have people with the right mindset, I think they will figure it out, and they will act in the best interest of the company without you having to tell them.
Thank you very much.
Yes, quickly, because she was referring to the different disciplines we are working in. So what I realized since COVID is that we are getting more and more back to our disciplinary boundaries, so that there are less work being done across disciplines, so across psychology and economics and sociology and political sciences. And this comes about when we eat together, when we juggle around ideas. So this is one of the reasons why. So I have a purpose while being there.
Thank you. Now I see we have the first ladies who wants to ask question. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for this layered and deep discussion. Actually, my questions will be going to Professor Jutta, because I am also myself a professor of social anthropology, teaching in Istanbul and working on women's labor. My questions will be about the methodology, especially sociological research methods, that how we can reflect to NGOs or to private sector, because I am also an academic advisor for an NGO, trying to create certain models to make women's studies much more deeper and create public policy. And I am very curious that what methods can be much more modifiable for this kind of areas, you think? And for the others as well, of course, they can also add, but Professor Jutta, maybe you can just elaborate more.
I'm really sorry. Could you repeat what kind of barriers you are talking about?
I mean, I am talking about the research methods we are using, sociology or anthropology, and how we can modify or reflect to the private sector or NGOs to develop the women studies themselves.
Yeah. Well, in terms of methods, I really have problems because surveys don't work anymore, really good, because people tend to give answers which they think we expect to hear. So we do more and more experiments, we do more and more observational methods, and we look how people behave, and we look about their medical track and things like this. And there we see that homework, extended homework, really increases stress and sort of increases the mental load, in particular of women. But this we measure with very, very different methods than those we used 10 years ago.
Thank you very much.
Hello, great conversation here, by the way, everyone. My name is Aida Sabo, and I'm Global Head of Inclusion at Parexel. And I have a question for Heike. I noticed that prior to you coming back to Berlin to work, you were in Japan. And I'd like to have you give us some examples of some of the work you did around gender equity in Japan.
Yeah, thank you. Japan is an interesting place in the world. You know, we all think of Japan as, you know, a very advanced economy. You know, we all have the Japan of the 80s in mind, you know, and when you arrive there, you know, look at the Japanese government. Is it one or two women in the government by now? You look at all the big companies. There's largely, hardly any women at the helm of any of the companies. So, and in the gender equality index, I think Japan is place 142 out of, I don't know, maybe out of 180 or 160, you know, which is interesting. Now, the interesting thing I saw was there is, if you look at how many women graduate from universities in Japan, the average across all the different subjects is 50%, okay? So you have a equal opportunity in terms of getting good education. Then they enter the workforce. There's two big dropout points. First one is getting married. And if you work in a Japanese company as opposed to a multinational company, I can tell you a lot of times your boss will come to you and say, oh, you know, Mrs. Prince, now that you're married, probably sooner rather than later, you would want to stay at home, right? And that's when, you know, promotions stop. Second dropout point, if you survive that and you still stay, okay, then the second dropout point is first, exactly, you're pregnant with your first child, okay? And then for sure, everybody in that Japanese company is going to expect you to stay at home. Now, I was the head of the multinational company in Japan, and that's a big difference, you know. And I think what we saw was, first of all, on my leadership team, we had like 50% of women. And that did a lot of things. And it was not difficult to find them. And they were promoted to these positions based on merit, okay? I want to be very clear, right? There was no such thing as, oh, let's make sure we have 50-50. They were all promoted based on merit. And that did something really, really important, I think, because in societies like the Japanese, it's important you provide role models so that women really see it is possible. But also, I can tell you it was an advantage if you wanted to recruit in the local market, because those women, and there are all these well-educated women, and many of them aspire for career and family at the same time, they choose to work rather for a multinational company as opposed to a local company, because they know we provide more flexibility. You know, there's not going to be people who show up and say to you, oh, now that you got married, you know, your career is probably over, and, right? So you can turn this also into a competitive advantage. and thus you can attract really high caliber talent. And by the way, what I also noticed is a lot of the men working for us, especially the younger generation, they also liked working for us rather than for a Japanese company because they wanted to take care of their kids, you know, and I saw more than once that they said, oh, I'm going to leave the office early because there is whatever, the school competition of my son and. But I will also say COVID changed a lot of things also to the positive in a sense that you have this presence culture. And that sort of got reduced a little bit, I must say. But I think there's a lot of work still to be done. And I don't mean to sound judgmental about Japanese society or anything. I'm just describing this because what I also like about it at the same time is, and I think there is a cultural context also to this hybrid work model. I like really the contextual nature of this culture where, you know, you walk into a room and people read the room. And you cannot read a screen to the same extent, okay? And there's a lot of communication that happens in a non-verbal way. And this is why, again, I think having a one-size-fits-all policy about hybrid work arrangements, in my mind, probably doesn't make too much sense. Yeah, you also have to, for instance, see it in the cultural context. But thanks for your question. And as you can tell, I always get passionate when I talk about Japan because I love working and living in Japan, I have to say.
Maybe I can add, I mean, this was amazing, but I just wanted to underline something that you just said, basically double click, I think we say these days. And that is that we cannot underestimate the power of the social norms that you just described, including on men. So nobody knows this, but Japan has the most generous parental leave policy in the world. The most generous parental leave policy. Doesn't discriminate between men and women, so fathers and mothers can take it equally. But only 7% of men are taking it. And they are not taking it maybe because they don't want to take it, but they're also not taking it because they know that they'll be punished for taking it. And they will be punished more so than women because it's so countercultural to take parental leave as a man. So I'm just kind of underlining what you just said. It's so very important for us to think about these cultural constraints that people face who work in our organizations.
Hello, my name is Veronica Romero. I am a master's student at the TU Berlin. And my question is inspired by the presentation of Jana. I would like to know more about how to overcome the bias you were talking about, like the productivity and the visibility bias when it comes to working remotely.
Yeah, I think that was a question to me in terms of like the proximity bias. I don't have a perfect solution. I'll be very honest. I think what we're seeing, and again, we as an organization, we have 400,000 employees, right? And we are pretty flexible across the world in terms of how people work. We make an intentional effort. So we basically request our leaders when it comes to making promotion decisions, when it comes to making career progression decisions. We deliberately raise the points about presence and ask the question, actively ask the questions whether the persons working remotely have anything to do with the way you're assessing. I think we have something very similar to what you were describing in terms of the marketplace. We've also introduced it and almost anonymized the marketplace. So you don't see whether it's Mary or Johnny or whether Mary works from home and Johnny works from the office. It's the skills description, the expertise, the industry expertise, so the different skills and the experiences versus the demand for the particular jobs. So when teams, and in particular in consulting, less so in where it requires like technical expertise, like deep technical tax knowledge, for instance. But when it comes to business consulting, or technology consulting. It's skills based. Have we sorted it out completely? For sure not. We still have a lot of biases. And when talking to the different organizations, I think most of them are striving sort of in those directions.
Can I add something quickly? I think first you have to measure. You have to measure whether people who work from home are evaluated differently, significantly differently from people who work in the office, holding everything else constant. So you have to run a multiple regression, which is what you're doing, right? So you have to first diagnose, is there a problem? Secondly, I think what was good, and I think you just mentioned that with the skills-based assessment, it forced many organizations to move beyond presenteeism, right? Is she in front of her computer 12 hours a day, and does she log in, log off 12 hours later? Thinking investment banking, sometimes consulting, and focus more on outputs, which is a very good thing, particularly for women, because as we know, women do better on performance and less well on potential when it comes to promotion decisions, because potential is much more subjective than performance. So I think these are all the good things. And then the final thing I would say is, just because we've just studied this, you know, even the remote organizations, I don't know any single remote organizations, even those that work fully remote, that don't get together. So they get together maybe a week in a quarter, or they get together 2 weeks in half a year. But they do have moments of touch points, because those interactions, you know, where you are face to face, where you have a purpose to actually meet, they are very important even for the remote workers.
Super interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we are already out of time, so I would say one last question, please. Short question, short answer.
That's lucky there's no one behind me. Narelle Hooper from Australia, and thank you for a really interesting discussion and thought-provoking. I'm conscious my mechanic is not able to work from home, but I'm conscious there's a large chunk of society that aren't able to work from home. My question was to delve more into Iris's points about the norms and the power of norms. And it seems we have practices and policies, but unless we shake those norms and re-norm that, things won't shift. I'd like to ask the panel if you have any examples of initiatives or successful re-norming of taking those kind of practices, such as parental leave or other things that advantage both parents. Thanks.
So I'm happy to get us started, but I know other people have lots of experience on norms too. I'm actually going to Australia. Telstra, your telecommunications company, did something very smart, and that's like 10 years ago, when I was actually spending a half a year in Australia. They changed the default of working, meaning you had to justify why you want to be in the office today. And the assumption was you work from home, unless you have a reason to come in. That's a way to change norms, right? That you change the default assumption in this organization. But you also mentioned, I think, a hard problem that I don't think any of us here has a very good answer to, and that is, it is deeply unfair that some people cannot work flexibly. It's just deeply unfair. I mean, nurses, very hard for a nurse to work remotely, although doctors actually increasingly do work remotely, because you now have AI, a computer, doing the surgery much better than the doctor ever could. And the doctor can, in fact, direct the computer from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the surgery takes place here in Berlin. But the unfairness of that, I think, is deep, and honestly, I don't have a good sense, other than, I'm going to end with that, to go back to a point that I made. It's so important for us to also think about those people in our society who could have more control over their schedules if we gave it to them, right? These are service workers, these are your fast food chain workers, these are people who might learn about their shift today for the next 2 months, or even just for the next week. And how can you plan anything in life, let alone daycare, if you don't have control over your time? So I do think we have to try to push this question of control over time very hard, not just for white-collar workers, but for anyone. But Jutta, I know you have done a lot of work on norms.
Well, my question is very easy. Just go to East Germany. Go to East Germany, there are entirely different gender norms. You know, women are used to work and having children. The tax system has been different for many, many decades, and they still live as if the structures would be different, because the culture continue, the norms of doing both family and work, more or less full-time, very, very different until now, so many decades after reunification. So norms can be changed through structural reforms. Here we still have huge tax benefits if one woman works or if one partner works less than the other. And I could continue with structural barriers, going to half-time schools or the lacking childcare facilities and so on. Change, structures, and culture will follow.
Thank you very much.